Welcome to Reflections, a show that seeks to examine if others see God in your reflection and how Scripture relates to us in this day and age. Peace and all God's blessings be with you. I am Father Bob Janine, the pastor of Mission St. Sergius and Bacchus, an all-inclusive, welcoming, affirming, independent Catholic Church ministry of the Order Franciscans of Mercy. We are a part of the Reformed Catholic Church. And today I'm sort of musing on life. Musing on life as an 83-and-a-half-year-old man who has completed 15 years as a priest and 38 years as a deacon, and more than 42 years as a teacher, in addition to some time as an actor and a producer and a director and a writer. I now find myself asking many questions about the state of our life today versus how it was in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. It is true that technology has made major advances in our lives, but I also believe we've lost an awful lot with it. As I was growing up, we didn't have television. We didn't see the news instantly. When we saw news, it was as a newsreel in the movie theaters, or we heard news on the radio. I remember distinctly December 7th. And this is a day that will go down in infamy. We now can see things as they're happening. Not days later, but instantly, while they're happening. We communicate people on the other side of the globe, not just by voice, but by actually seeing them. Every few months, we do a Skype conference call where we can see each other and as we're talking to each other. We can see the pictures we take instantly and decide which one is the best to save. And then we can print it out. We don't have to take the film and take in that roll of film. Some of you probably don't even know what I'm talking about. And put it in a container and bring it to a place where they would process it and then develop it and print the pictures, and you'd go a few days later and pick them up. No, nowadays, oh, I like that picture. Okay, I'm saving it. Send it to the computer, print it, and there it is. You got it. We have, in my lifetime, landed a man on the moon, explored space. We've sent rockets to Mars. There's, I believe, one that's floating towards Venus. We have a satellite where men are actually flying around in this satellite around the Earth. We have telescopes in the sky that are bringing us images never before seen by man. So much has happened. We found ways to cure diseases. Polio, the mumps, measles, chickenpox, forms of cancer. Improve the quality of life for people who are living with cancer and AIDS and Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis. And we're working on curing those diseases. And people are living longer when they do have those diseases. We've made some great advances, but we've also lost a lot. As a child, we walked to school. For me, it was about a mile, maybe a mile and a quarter. And we walked home for lunch, and then walked back to school, and then walked home again. Talk about exercise. Even if it was a mile and a quarter, and it may have been a mile and a half. Mile and a half and a mile and a half, that's 3. 6 miles every day. My friend Jack and I used to take off and we'd walk to Castle Island, or we'd walk from where I lived in Clam Point, or the area in Dorchester known as Clam Point that was between Freeport Street and Victory Road, overlooking the bay. We would walk all the way down to Castle Island, or maybe we'd walk all the way to the Museum of Fine Arts. We walked a lot. We read a lot. We didn't have games. We weren't hooked to our earphones, and we actually, after school, would go out and play. The neighbors knew everybody. Everybody shared. During World War II, people had food stamps, and you were limited, depending on the number of people. Well, because of my father's job, sometimes there were extra food stamps that were not able to be delivered to the address that they went to because the address didn't exist. So those food stamps got shared amongst all the neighbors. And people shared food. Your doors were never locked. They were always open. You might be off somewhere and come home and find a freshly baked apple pie, or maybe some baklava, or stuffed grape leaves. I lived in a very eclectic neighborhood, thanks be to God. We had the Talanian family. Peter and Lucy Talanian, they had this little store, but also they lived right across the street. And they were Armenian, I believe. And then we had German, Irish, Italian. We had Polish. And religion-wise, we had Christian Science, Catholic, Episcopal, Baptist. There were no microwaves. We actually sat down and ate dinner together that was homemade. There were no convection ovens. There was no such thing as instant meals or fast food. We had our milk and our butter and our eggs delivered by Kennedy's and H.P. Hood. And bread and cakes and pies were often baked at home or by a neighbor. And if bought, it came from a local bakery. Nowadays, it's very hard to find a bakery. In those days, there used to be a bakery in almost every neighborhood. Weekends were family time. Stores were not open on a Sunday. No, Sunday was family time. Everyone went to their church. The Jewish people went to church on Saturday, or to synagogue on Saturday, to shul. And all Christian people went to their churches. And afterwards, they'd be back home or visiting their families and having dinners together and talking, communicating. In my neighborhood, at Christmas, there was an open house. And we used to go along singing carols. 4th of July, all the kids did a parade. And then the parents, there was a block party. And in the evening, all the fathers had gotten together and got fireworks, and from the hill, we had our own fireworks display. And we would have a block party every summer. And every summer, we would all go over to Squaw Rock and have a real old-fashioned clam bake, just like in the movie. As I said, Sundays began with church. And it didn't matter the denomination. Our next-door neighbors were Episcopal. Up the street, the homesteads were Christian Science. And we had Presbyterian, we had, of course, Roman Catholic. Most churches had a daily mass, and the attendance at those daily masses was often greater than you see now on a Sunday mass. Because, and stores, definitely, you were not going out shopping on a Sunday. Gang violence, almost unheard of. Oh yeah, there was the adult gangs, but not in the neighborhood and kids. And the worst thing that kids did was sneak cigarettes in the restroom or take a sip of dad's beer or whiskey. Hearing of a child bringing a gun to school or killing somebody, that was unconscionable. That didn't happen. Neighbors looked out for one another. And the rationing I talked about during World War II, where neighbors shared with each other to make sure that everyone had enough food for their family. And parents never, ever disputed a teacher. When the child was found to have broken a rule or failed to bring an assignment or worse, you never heard the parents say, "Oh no, my child didn't do that." Sadly, because parents believed that people who were in responsible positions like teachers and priests would never, ever violate the trust that their position had by harming a child. And sadly, it happened. And we finally learned about it. It became very public, universally, and we're still dealing with it. Child abuse. And we're hearing about, again, people in authority using their authority to abuse adults. So there was negative that came out of those times. In those days, many sporting events and public meetings began with a prayer. That was banned and forgotten. Professional sports were just that. They were sports, not a business. They were sports because the people enjoyed playing them, and they were good at it. And the greats, Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, Lou Gehrig, Jackie Robinson, Bobby Orr, Fernie Flaman, they never, ever even dreamed of earning the salaries that our sports people earn today. I mean, they played it and they were good at it. And yes, they were able to support their families, but they certainly did not have the salaries that players and baseball players, football players, hockey players, all the sports. Millions of dollars a year a player gets. But it also has made the cost of going to watch one of these games almost out of touch and unable for most people because they can't afford it. They have struggling trying to feed our families today. The cost of things have gone sky high. My dad bought our house in 1940, I believe it was, for $3,000. In 1976, we sold that house for $36,000 and thought that was good. Today, that house is on the market, and trust me, it's not in very good shape. It's one of the worst in our neighborhood. I went by there recently and started crying when I saw how poorly it had been maintained. But it's on the market for over $100,000. When you went shopping, store clerks were courteous and knowledgeable. And most stores had a policy, the customer is always right. And that, sometimes people took advantage of it. But that was the policy. And made in America was a tag on most of the clothing. I had the pleasure of seeing the original King and I with Gertrude Lawrence and the original production of Oklahoma on Broadway. I went to the circus and ice capades and ice follies and hockey games, the symphony, operas, and other cultural events also. We had music and art in grade school and in high school. They were part of the curriculum. Today, I cannot afford even to go to a movie. $12, $13, $15 for a movie? Broadway shows didn't even cost that much in those days. Now, going to a Broadway show, I don't know. I can't go. The football game, it costs hundreds of dollars, over $100 to go to see a football game. It costs more than $100 to go to a Broadway show or a concert. I hear the prices for some of these things and I wonder how these people have this kind of money. With master's degrees, credentials in all subjects, and as I said earlier, 42 years of teaching. My highest salary was my last year that I taught in 2001, and that was $36,000 a year. You can't live on that kind of money. Now, my Social Security is $1,110 a month. That's what I have to live on. I don't understand how people can enjoy some of the wonderful things that I was able to enjoy as a young person. And they need to have exposure to all forms of culture, music, art, The cost of a ticket to a show today could more than feed me for more than a week. So much has changed. Some for the best, others, I believe, not so. I don't think today we are as sociable and knowledgeable and friendly and as we used to be. People have little time for close social activities and family reunions and dinners because many times people have to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Families rarely ever gather together on a regular basis. And we're closing churches left and right because people aren't attending, and you can't maintain them if they're not attending. I feel that God has greatly blessed me to have lived in the times that I lived. And my best friend, who I've known since 1941. 1941 we first met. And we were both discussing this recently, and that's why this homily has come about. How we used to take and walk and do things, and the things that we used to do, and the experiences and the wonderful exposure that we had to so many things. Children today, and both of us taught. We both became teachers. And we see the difference in education, even with the magnificent advances that have come technologically to make education come more alive than just in a book. It's not the same. Something is missing. God has blessed me with so many wonderful memories that I hold fondly in my heart. And I thank my mom and my dad for allowing me to have the exposure to and making sure, first of all, in our house, you never, at night, you heard, "Good night, God bless you," at the end of every day. And you knew your prayers when you were very, very, very young. And sometimes you would pray together as a family. And you usually went to church together. God blessed me with these memories, and I often worry and pray for the young people today as they are facing challenges we never, ever had to face. And I believe they're greater than those we did face and overcame. The time is now. The time is now for everyone to reflect back on what we have lost and to try to reclaim those things that made the great nation what it is, that allowed us to conquer the evils of World War I and World War II and Korea and Vietnam. And so it went on and on and on, and we are engaged now in another long, painful war. And this time it's a war that is based on religion, on the differences. And some of the hatred goes back to the Crusades, an evil that was perpetrated by the church, sadly. And because of that, now some people who are Muslim or claim to be, but they're not, because they're not living according to the Quran. What they are doing is totally opposite what the Quran has to say. But we're engaged, and it's killing many, many, many of our young men and women. We need, especially, to turn ourselves back to God. We need to keep holy the Sabbath. Whatever day of the week the Sabbath is, if you are Muslim, if you're Jew, if you're Christian, we're all worshiping the one and only God, the same God. We are children of that God. And everything in this world belongs to that God. And we were given dominion over it. We were supposed to take care of it. And we haven't done a very good job of that. God said, "Let make man in our image and our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures and that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. The image of God he created them. Male and female he created them.